You're listening to episode 248 of Mitolife Radio. I'm your host, Matt Blackburn, and today I'm speaking with Dr. Robert Selig. I first discovered Robert's work several years ago on YouTube. I saw a zinc and copper video that he made when he was making connections to Mars and Venus, and a lot of really interesting esoteric connections to those two minerals. Robert is an expert in something called HTMA, hair tissue mineral analysis, which I've had a few shows on in the past, has a different way of approaching the results. And I appreciate Robert's approach because it seems to be a little more open-minded. He's not getting pigeonholed into just using one supplement brand, but using multiple different products to get results with his clients. So in this interview, we talk mostly about zinc and copper. Robert talks about mercury's effect on zinc, the role of zinc fingers, the World Health Organization stat of the world's zinc deficiency, and then Robert's view of what percent of humans on the earth have zinc deficiency, why zinc deficiency won't be shown on a blood test, how many years it takes to mobilize heavy metals in the body, what is the ideal zinc to copper ratio, why he believes coffee enemas and sauna therapy are indispensable to cleanse the liver and kidneys, respectively, why he enjoys the niacin flush, why molybdenum is so important and its roles in the body, the role of manganese, calcification, why he uses tissue salts with his clients. And then I ask listener questions, including thoughts on vitamin C dosing related to iron and copper, thoughts on lithium, and if there's ever a bad time to supplement with it. Is mineral balancing a lifelong commitment? Inorganic versus organic minerals. Can you reverse gray hair? How do you know if you're iodine deficient? Is it possible to reverse a calcium shell? Why are so many people allegedly seeing results on the high dose copper protocol? Gender differences in supplementing zinc and copper, methylene blue, best way to detox a child of arsenic and aluminum, and a whole lot more. This show is really jam-packed, so get your notepads ready and enjoy the show. Here is Dr. Robert Selig. All right, we're here with Robert Selig. Welcome to the show.
Hey, man, thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be your guest. I'm a big fan of yours.
Well, I'm a big fan of yours. I appreciate that. I love all the information you've been putting out over the years, not only on zinc recently, but just on mineral balancing. And I was telling you before we hit record, I've had a few episodes on hair tissue mineral analysis. I've done it once myself, and I had the common low sodium to potassium ratio, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And I was just kind of put off, and I've said this before in my show, that you have to take these supplements. And since I sell supplements, I don't want to not take my own products. That would be unethical. So I stopped the mineral balancing as the way that, who was the founder of
Dr. Eck?
Yeah, Eck. And then who was after him that studied under Eck? It was
Dr. Wilson, Dr.
Wilson.
Eck. And,
yep.
Then you got trace elements, David Watts.
Okay.
Those are the three big honchos that kind of were the grandfathers of hair tissue mineral analysis. And now it seems like it's going in a new direction, more of an upgrade. I hope it's keeping some flexibility where we don't become so dogmatic and then that's it, because we have to always stay flexible.
I love that. Yeah. Are you aware of that, like the Limcomin and that whole mentality of like you can only take these supplements? Yeah. Is that accurate?
I avoided that like the plague because when I'm doing mineral balancing, I'm using probably, I won't use any of their products first and foremost because I don't think they're the highest quality. And so I have probably about 7 different nutritional companies that I'm running with because not one company is going to have everything I need. And so I always just looking for who has the highest quality. And I've actually never tried your stuff. So I'm hoping you can turn me on to some of your goodies.
I'd love that. Yeah. Zinc carnosine is a form that I really was drawn to, especially as I started to study lipid peroxidation and all the stuff that I'm into. That amino acid carnosine is just so fascinating with its anti-glycation properties and anti-aging, just all the stuff that it does. And I know on social media, the thing I noticed is people are really into the forms, and I think one mentality out there is like the more forms, the better. So if you can pack in 7 different forms of magnesium in one supplement, it's better. I kind of disagree with that philosophy, but I'm curious your thoughts on it.
I think that there's not much different what mineral it's chelated to, what amino acid a mineral is going to be chelated to. It may be 1, 2, 3% for absorption stuff in most cases, especially with zinc, because I like using a variety of different zincs. I don't just stick with one zinc. I love the zinc picolinate. I love the zinc carnosine. So wherever we're talking barrier function, whenever we see these leaky guts, that zinc carnosine is the all-star. And so I love that combination, but I don't really think it makes too much of a difference because anytime a mineral is chelated to an amino acid means you got to have stomach acid, you got to have pancreatic juices so you can break those 2 things off. So then the zinc can be absorbed. So I don't really waste too much time on looking at all the nuances of what it's, all the different variations of chelate combinations. So I don't get too caught up in that.
Yeah, because I've heard some of them say that are affiliated with a company that uses that in their marketing, that the mineral won't get to the to different tissues. Like what it's chelated to will make it tissue specific. So it will be delivered to target areas. Is that?
I don't, there's some truth in that, but again, I don't waste too much time on all the minutia nuances of that. I just make sure that I try to get the highest quality stuff. And again, absorption, there's so many factors that influence absorption. And so how do we increase the body's ability to absorb these minerals? And that's kind of where I'm always focusing on. And then there are a lot of people that are very sensitive to minerals. So maybe you have to start with even just the tissue salts. When people have a sensitivity to A, B, or C, you may have to start from a place where they're not going to react so violently. And that's where I find the tissue salts become indispensable.
Wow. Well, we have a lot of good jumping off points, but I kind of jumped the gun without properly introducing you. So how did you get interested in this whole field of hair tissue mineral analysis, mineral balancing? What kind of piqued your interest at the start of all this, of your studies?
Like every doctor, I think we're all wounded healers. So my own health issues has been my journey. So when I was in my earlier years, I used to break every bone in my body. I had cavities in every tooth in my body, horrible skin. I had the forward head carriage, always low energy, always fatigued, couldn't stay awake in classes. So I made a decision that I would die trying to figure out how I was going to heal myself. And that's been my quest over my entire life. Now at the age of 60, this is the best I've ever felt. And I feel my bones are getting rock solid. So the work that I put in over the last 40 years is just starting to pay off because right now I feel wonderful.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, that's my goal in life. It's like, you look at birthday cards and it's all jokes about getting older and breaking down like a car, right? That's pretty negative mentality.
It is negative mentality because our goal is to age gracefully. And to age gracefully, we better understand about deficiencies and toxicities, which are at the root of all our chronicity that we see throughout the country. So I've been working on my detox. I've been working on mineral balancing, as well as becoming more honest with my emotional state, because honesty trumps everything. So understanding how our emotions tie into this, understanding how mercury ties into this, and all the chemicals and everything. So it's not a linear approach, because there's going to be a lot of twists and turns on the healing journey. But the greatest goal is to get healthy, so you age gracefully without the cancers, without the senility diseases, so that you can, hopefully live to over 100 years of age, and being able to do everything that I'm doing today, I can do when I'm 100. That's the goal, and I'll die trying to get to that goal.
That's great. It took me years to learn. You mentioned deficiencies and toxicities, that those are linked together intimately, right? Like toxicities cause deficiencies. Especially if we're talking about heavy metals. I know a lot of people in the HTMA community talk about how, they'll kind of displace minerals like zinc, which is critical, and they kind of fill a role. Or if you're deficient in zinc, the metals will come in and fill the role to try to kind of compensate. Is that accurate? Or
absolutely. And I was just doing some digging when I'm doing my zinc presentation for the Mineral Summit. I was researching at the University of New Mexico. Their research clinicians were working with Navajo Nation, and the Native Americans absolutely have the worst health across, in the country, leading the league in cancers, diabetes, depression, alcoholism. They have the worst health. And so this team of researchers at the University of New Mexico was trying to figure out why. Why did the Native Americans have the worst health in the country? What they discovered in that region of the country, they were doing a lot of nuclear testing, mining of uranium. When they were digging up the uranium, they were digging up the cadmium, the mercury, the arsenic, the lead, and all this toxic sludge got into the groundwater, into the earth, into the air. As a result, they were discovering how these toxic metals, specifically in the zinc finger, the zinc finger is how a protein folds, which attaches to the DNA. So if you have a mutated strand of DNA, you need that zinc finger to bind to that specific target part of the DNA that's mutated. What they found is specifically how these toxic metals, arsenic, lead, cadmium, was displacing the nutrient mineral zinc in the zinc finger, resulting in a deficient protein. And when you have a deficient protein that can't fold in that perfect 3D form, it's basically an unusable protein, resulting in the carcinogenesis that we see in the Native Americans across the board. And it was showing how these toxic metals displace the nutrient minerals. In fact, 1 ion of mercury will displace 1,000 ions of zinc. How do we know that? Well, we have to go back to the mercurial diuretics that were prescribed in the 40s. So if you had hypertension, there was a good chance that you got put on mercurial diuretics, and that affected the carbonic anhydrase enzymes in the proximal convoluted tubules of your kidneys, in which you were pissing out buttloads of zinc at a clip of about 1,000 to 1 ions of zinc to 1 ion of mercury was ending up in the toilet bowl. So we know that these toxic metals displace the nutrient minerals, and especially zinc, which is under attack because zinc is redox inert. Where copper, iron, manganese, they have redox potential. But because zinc is a transitional metal, but it doesn't transition, it's redox inert, and that's why it's a great stabilizing metal for proteins, especially in the zinc finger. The zinc finger is one of the most important parts of zinc that we need to become familiar with, because those zinc fingers make up 10% of all the proteins in your body. Those zinc fingers is how it It's how it can read the DNA, because on the DNA, you have a DNA binding domain, and that has to be coordinated to the protein so the protein can attach to that specific DNA binding domain. And that's where that becomes the DNA auditing system. That's why zinc and magnesium are your DNA auditing system. And those two metals are under attack. And we know that all these chemicals and metals will chelate out these nutrient minerals, resulting in what we see today, the carcinogenesis and all these autoimmune diseases and all these, horrible health issues that are plaguing our country. And even with the zinc fingers, the orthodox medicine understands that when they create a designer drug, a gene therapy drug, an anti-cancer drug, they're using the zinc finger to use their drug bound to the zinc finger so they can specifically target that mutated part of the DNA. So in theory, it'll either delete it or repair the mutated part of the DNA. But the bottom line is they understand the importance of the zinc finger in their drug therapy research that they're doing.
Wow, that's fascinating.
It is. It's absolutely fascinating. And I got that out of this book right here, Engineered Zinc Finger Proteins. And it says, among many types of DNA binding domains, zinc finger proteins have proven to be the most malleable for creating custom DNA binding domains. So big medicine understands this. My whole thing is an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So whatever they're doing in the research and cancer and all that, why don't we put our attention on how do we get these toxic metals out and how do we get these nutrient minerals back into the system? That's where the smart money is at. So like I said, ounce of prevention worth a pound of cure.
I love it. Yeah, for years, I focused heavily on magnesium for stress mitigation and reduction. And then I learned about vitamin C's role, ascorbic acid. And then now I'm bringing zinc into the picture because zinc is one of the minerals that we burn the fastest under stress, isn't it?
Absolutely. So I'm saying there's a war on zinc. Are you familiar with the iconic TV show, The Simpsons?
Yes.
Okay. So The Simpsons have a skit. It's called A World Without Zinc. And in that skit, they're talking about a world without zinc. The battery doesn't work. The telephone doesn't work. The gun doesn't work. That is symbolically telling you that when you are lacking zinc, nothing in your human physiology will work. The battery, that represents the juice of life. And we know that sperm are loaded with zinc. The reason why we see the sperm count going down 50% in the last 50 years is because of a zinc deficiency. And so the whole fertility thing with men shooting blanks, boys turning into girls, is because we are deficient in zinc, because we need zinc for the prostate and for sperm. Absolutely. And they even call it the zinc spark of life. When that sperm hits the ovum, they call it the zinc spark of life, beginning life. That's how important zinc is. So in this Simpsons skit, they also had the telephone. Telephone represents communication. When you lack zinc, you're losing the cell signaling molecule zinc. And that's why we see these autistic kids, high copper, low zinc across the board. We need that zinc for brain communication because zinc is loaded in the brain, in the hippocampus, and the hypothalamus, and the pituitary, in the meninges, loaded with zinc. So that zinc is turning on our brain for communication. And the Simpsons are warning us, a world without zinc, nothing works. And then their third example was a gun. And the gun represents your immune system. So zinc is always fighting for your immune system, whether it's barrier function, innate immunity, adaptive immunity. You need zinc to turn on your white blood cells. All your fluids in your body, cerebral spinal fluids, synovial fluids, menstrual fluids, seminal fluids. Every fluid in your body is lined with zinc, acting as a protective element, protecting the waters in the body. That's how important zinc is. So when you see The Simpsons warning you about zinc, and they are the most prophetic of all the TV shows, they're always telling us things. They predicted Trump's victory. They were the first to tell you about Siegfried and Roy's lion attack, and many, many things in popular culture they've nailed. So when they're telling you a world without zinc, I take that seriously. Then the WHO, the World Health Organization, they're on record saying that 1/3 of the world's population has a gross zinc deficiency. I'm on record saying that 98% of everyone walking on this planet today has a marginal, subtle zinc deficiency, but that will never be revealed on any standard lab test we have today. However, when we use serial hair tissue mineral analysis, in due time, that zinc deficiency will be revealed in the adults, because adults are what we call poor eliminators. Most adults today cannot remove the toxic metals. It will take a minimum of 1 year to 7 years before the adult is able to mobilize these toxic metals out. So when that mercury starts to come out, the zinc on the hair test, which is usually in that optimal range, which gives you a false sense of security, but as the toxic metal comes out, that zinc will take its parking space back in the enzyme binding site, revealing what I said from day one, that we're walking around with marginal, subtle zinc deficiencies. But you got to be patient with hair tests, because in due time, it will reveal the subtle marginal zinc deficiency. Now, in children, you'll see children right away. You'll see those toxic metals high on these kids, always that low zinc across the board, because most adults are poor eliminators because of kidney congestion and stagnant livers, meaning that the kidneys, the microtubules in the kidneys, are showing signs of fibrosis, meaning that the liver, the biliary caniculi, are showing signs of fibrosis. When the two main organs of detoxification, your liver and kidneys, aren't working optimally, you won't detox anything. That's why you got to be patient with hair tissue mineral analysis when you're on a program, and eventually you'll see toxic metals coming out, that zinc coming down. So that's what I find fascinating.
I love it. This is all really great. Can you explain why a subtle zinc deficiency won't be revealed on a blood test? Because I think a lot of people go by the blood test, and I always think, like, unless you do a tissue biopsy, you're not really going to know our status of different nutrients, right? Like, especially fat soluble nutrients, those are pretty hard. I mean, vitamin D might be an exception.
Yeah. You know what vitamin D needs for its activation?
Magnesium.
It needs magnesium so in the liver, it has to get hydroxylated on the 25th carbon, but that's still inactive vitamin D. Then it's going to go to the kidneys, and it's going to get hydroxylated on the first carbon to give us 125 dihydroxycholecalciferol, which is active vitamin D. However, all your steroid hormones and fat-soluble vitamins, they all exert their effect on the cell nucleus, not the cell membrane, the cell nucleus. That's what we call intracellular receptors. So that vitamin D will simply diffuse through the cell membrane. It'll exert its effect on the VDR receptor that needs a zinc finger so it can transcribe and translate that into a usable protein. So thank you, zinc, once again. But I forgot what your question was.
No, that's great. I wasn't aware of that with VDR. Why won't zinc deficiency show up on a plasma zinc test, or why isn't that completely accurate?
Good. That's the question I forgot to answer. Because biochemistry happens in the cells, not the blood. That doesn't mean we throw away blood, because blood will tell us about anemias, leukemias, and it does tell us important things in liver enzymes. but biochemistry happens in the cells. So when they're doing blood samples, 99% of that zinc is in the cells, not the blood. So when they're doing blood tests, they're looking at the 1%. When we're doing hair biopsies, we're looking at the status of zinc in the body over that 3-month window to give us a better indication of the total zinc load in the body. However, to be really accurate, you would have to biopsy every cell in the body to figure out the real zinc load. Now, how many milligrams of zinc does the average person have in their body? Question for you.
I think it was, if I remember correctly, between 3 and 5, somewhere in there, milligrams. Is that or grams? Excuse me. Yeah.
Anywhere between 2,000 and 3,000 milligrams of zinc in the total body that's dispersed to every cell in the body. Highly concentrated in the prostate, the eyes, the liver, the brain, and most of it's in the muscle and most of it's in the bone, but then that 10% will be highly distributed in the prostate, eyes, liver. But that's about 2,000 to 3,000 milligrams of zinc, where you only have about 100 milligrams to 150 milligrams of copper. So that's about a 20-to-1 ratio. So if you took the low number of zinc, 2,000, the low number of copper, 100 milligrams, that's a 20-to-1 ratio. So that's why I think the spotlight should be more on zinc than copper, because copper, because of its redox potential, has the ability to be very destructive to the body. And the body is going to tightly and highly regulate iron and copper because of its love affair with oxygen and the ability to produce all those hydroxyl free radicals. But zinc is a stabilizing, like I said, zinc is on the transitional metals, but it doesn't transition. It's redox inert. And that's why zinc is so amazing in its ability to help with the healing potential of the body and its use in over 300 plus catalytic functions or co-catalytic functions, plus thousands of zinc fingers. So that's why zinc is absolutely phenomenal. But did I answer your question on the blood?
That was great. Yeah. We were chatting before the show. I came from the copper crowd, which a lot of their messaging is, the diagnosed anemia is just copper deficiency in disguise. But I look back at the first 3 decades of my life, and I didn't like red meat. I only started eating red meat in my 30s, really. And, no oysters, no liver, barely any red meat for 30 years. And I look back on that and I'm like, where was the zinc coming from? I was probably getting copper in all the other foods that I was eating, the soy, vegetables. Is copper super hard to get, like some people make it out to be, or is it everywhere?
It's pretty much in many, many foods. But the problem with copper is that, now the thing about copper is we have, copper is highly affiliated with the estrogens. So wherever estrogen goes, copper goes. So we know that when a woman's pregnant, her estrogen goes up, copper goes up. It doubles, And we know that when a woman delivers the baby, calcium goes high, copper goes high, estrogens go high. And after she delivers the baby, the calcium comes down, the estrogens come down. If the copper doesn't come down, that's the postpartum depression, anxiety, and all that stuff. But the point being is, the estrogens cause copper retention. So we don't really have an issue with the normal age-related estrogens or the phytoestrogens we're getting from flax, hops, soy. Those usually the body can handle. The issue is the xenoestrogens, the imposters, the fake estrogens. So when you add up the xenoestrogens plus the normal age-related estrogens plus the phytoestrogens, that leaves us a world of high estrogens. The high estrogens cause copper retention. As a result, that copper bioaccumulates in the liver, and then in the liver, that's going to cause a lot of reactive damage in the liver, resulting in that liver first becoming a stagnant liver, then it becomes a fatty liver, Then the fatty liver eventually becomes fibrosed, leading to cirrhosis, leading to malignancy. But this is how important it is detoxing this toxic copper out of that liver. Because the problem with this copper, whether it's the copper piping, when you drink water from copper piping, it bypasses digestion. It gets right into the blood, and that's causing the copper to be elevated pretty much at an alarming rate these days. Plus the toxic xenoestrogens we've been inundated with, causing the copper retention. So all this copper being retained is becoming very, very reactive. And what I kind of recently discovered was in the mitochondria, where we have these iron sulfur clusters that ping pong the electrons, and eventually they're going to ping pong the electrons to copper, and copper is going to be the final donator of electrons to oxygen. But what happens in an aerobic situation, that's great. But when we become anaerobic, that copper in the mitochondria will go to the iron sulfur clusters, breaking up these iron sulfur clusters, releasing the iron. As a result, now we got this accumulation of iron in the mitochondria wreaking havoc. So there's this copper iron connection in the mitochondria that's breaking down in an aerobic situation, resulting in this disastrous toxic iron flooding into the mitochondria. And we know how toxic that is. Hopefully that kind of made sense. I may have lost you on that, but
I followed it. That was great. And you're not saying copper is just toxic across the board. It's an essential nutrient, right? But it just has to be in balance. Like it definitely has roles in the mitochondria.
Oh, absolutely. Without copper, life would cease to exist. It's the final donator of electrons to molecular oxygen in that final step in the electron transport chain. And copper has many, many functions. So that is important. This is why we don't want to demonize copper. We want to understand copper. We want to understand, why are we walking around with this total excess copper that's bio-unavailable, where it's not bound, and when it's unbound, it behaves like a toxic metal. So that, therefore, it needs to be respected. So if we don't get this toxic copper out, and I've gone through more copper dumps in 20 years on doing hair tissue mineral analysis. So I've gone through, like on a hair test, typically your copper should be at 2.5. I've had copper dumps in the 20s, 18s, back to the 20s, finally got under 10. Then it went back to the 18s or 19s. And then just recently, mine. Okay, I see what you're showing.
There's mine off the charts.
Yeah. And so if you don't deal with that toxic copper, its end game is, it's going to be two things. It's going to be the cancers. That's when apoptosis doesn't work. Or it's going to be when apoptosis works too much. That's all the brain diseases, the senility diseases, the Parkinson's, the MS, etc. So the end game of copper will either be the brain diseases or the cancers. So this is why we have to really put that spotlight on understanding copper, not demonizing it, because it absolutely is critical for human health. But when we use serial hair tissue analysis, we can see the status of copper, and when it's high, that means that's bio-unavailable, meaning it's wreaking havoc, mostly in that liver. And then when the liver load is overwhelmed, then it goes to the brain, then it goes to wherever you have estrogen receptors throughout the body, and it will overwhelm the body like no tomorrow, because it is the most reactive element on the table. That's why electricians use copper wiring, because it moves electrons better than anything. You could make the argument that silver moves electrons better, which it does. So silver moves electrons, number one, but number two is copper. Silver is not a nutrient mineral, but copper is. This is why we need to respect copper, not to demonize it. We need to understand it so we can remove this toxic bio-unavailable copper that's hanging out in your liver, wreaking havoc in the liver. The liver is where we live. Lib spelt backwards is evil. Those are the evil spirits, the alcohol, the chemicals, the metals that destroy where we live. All right, that was a good rant. I'll let you ask me a question.
I love it. So in a hair tissue mineral analysis, because a lot of people are probably listening to this wondering, like, how do I know how much zinc to take? How do I know, where's the guidance? And I would imagine you would point to the hair tissue mineral analysis tests. I've been told if an element on there is elevated, it could mean that you're just excreting it, so it's a good thing. Or are there different ways that people read these? Yeah,
I mean, if like pick one mineral that you want to talk about that in your example. Give me a mineral.
Let's say lithium.
Okay. So lithium is, that's part of the original Trinity. So during the Big Bang, that gave us hydrogen, helium, lithium. That was the original Trinity. And lithium is why we have a thinking man's brain. So if I've actually never seen high lithium on any of the hair tests that I've done. I usually see lower levels of lithium.
I was supplementing good amounts, like just as an experiment for a couple weeks. Yeah.
So if I see high lithium, the first thing you're going to ask, what products are you using? What supplements are you using? Because it's not getting into the cell, it's pissing into the blood. And in the blood, then it gets into the urine, it gets into all the excretory tissues, showing high on a hair test. So you always want to do some digging before you just panic and react to the high this or the low that. You want to understand what's the big picture all about. So if I see high zinc on a hair test, that's telling me maybe they're using some zinc-related shampoos, or maybe that maybe they're over supplementing with zinc and it's not getting into the cell where it belongs, and they're just pissing it out and it's showing up high in an excretory organ. And that can also be very detrimental to health. That's why all minerals eventually are going to go through those kidneys, and those kidneys are, you don't want to mess with the kidneys because those microtubules, that are, doing, absorbing, reabsorbing, doing all that stuff. You don't want to just go crazy with taking mega doses of anything. You want a systematic approach, and you want to build up the mineral matrix over time. You don't want to do any heroic doses. You want to do it gently over time with patience and with intelligence, using hair tissue analysis every 4 or 5 months so you can adjust the dose of this or that. So looking at the sodium potassium inversion is usually how I dose my copper and how I dose my zinc.
Looking at the sodium to potassium ratio?
Yeah, that's the main way of how I dose copper and zinc.
It is a low sodium to potassium, is that one of the most common things you see in clients?
That is very common, and that just means that we're dealing with a lot of chronicity, chronic infections, chronic metals, liver congestion, kidney congestion, a lot of chronicity, because it should be 2.5 sodiums to 1 potassium. When we see that inversion, that means that something's off, and sodium and potassium set the table for the whole nerve transmission. And so when we have dysregulation of sodium potassium, the whole cell membrane permeability is going to be off. Sometimes it'll be too high where too many things are coming in, or sometimes it's going to be too low and not enough things are coming in. So that's why the spotlight is always on calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium, looking at the Fab4 and looking at the ratios of calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium. When those two ratios are in nice harmony, you're feeling pretty good. But most people are going to be dysregulated, whether it's the calcium-magnesium ratio or the sodium-potassium ratio. But whenever you see a low NAK ratio, it's a lot of chronicity. Chronic what? Chronic infections, chronic metals, chronic dysbiosis, a lot of stagnation and a lot of the organs of elimination.
A lot of people would think if there's they hear low sodium and think, oh, I'm just going to take a bunch of salt. But you're saying there's actually a connection with copper and zinc, right? With sodium, potassium, which you wouldn't think. Well,
Right. And that's why, when we look at a hair test, we're not doing replacement therapy. We're doing balancing. And that balancing, like I said, most adults are what we call pore eliminators. They're holding and retaining these toxic metals. And as they hold and retain these toxic metals, because of liver congestion, kidney congestion, just overall deficiencies and toxicities, they retain these toxic metals. So that means those toxic metals are taking the parking space of these nutrient minerals in the enzyme binding site. Then eventually, as we do a detoxification program, as we're doing a mineral balancing program, those minerals come on board. Now the all-seeing brain will say it's safe to start releasing that toxic metal. And the body will only release a toxic metal when it knows that it won't put you in harm's way. Now, even when those toxic metals come out, you may get an aggravation. You may get a headache. You may get insomnia. You may get a skin flare-up. You may get that arthritic joint that's been dormant for years, all of a sudden gets aggravated. So we have to be able to deal with these aggravations that prop up on a mineral balancing detoxification program. This is where I love homeopathic remedies that help us get through an aggravation, because our goal is not to avoid the aggravation. Our goal is to make these aggravations manageable and doable to navigate, detoxing these toxic metals. Because these toxic metals, when you're dumping mercury, you think you're dying. But it's a necessary evil that we have to get these toxic metals out so we can get healthy, so that zinc can come on board. But if we don't get these metals out, we're going to pay the price down the road. That's why we see the chronicity in this country. In 2024, cancer will get 1 out of 2 adults will get a cancer diagnosis in 2024. And then cancer will probably be the leading cause of death in the United States in the next couple of years. So we have to understand this toxic load is destroying us. And that's why mineral balancing has to be consistent. It can't be like focusing on heroic doses. And then we use the hair tissue as our blueprint and our guide through the mineral balancing prescribing of nutrients. That was long-winded.
That's great. Well, I know in the natural health community for years, at least a decade, coffee enemas have been really popular. I know Lawrence Wilson recommends those heavily. We have a wood burning outside barrel sauna, the old school steam sauna with rocks and stuff, which is amazing in the winter. Do you think people could do damage by, doing coffee enemas and or sauna, and they're dumping these metals without properly supplementing and replenishing at the same time? Like, do you have to do both to get results, or is a sauna usually going to be beneficial for people?
Okay. So the sauna, to me, the coffee enemas are the liver. Mm-hmm. The saunas are the kidneys. Every toxin has to go through either the liver or the kidneys, or sometimes both. Copper is only going to be mobilized out of the body through the liver. That's the importance of the coffee enema. So if you want to mobilize all this garbage out, especially that copper, you got to hit the coffee enemas, because those biliary caniculi are fibrosed. They're showing scar tissue. And the liver is a blood hog. That's where many infections hang out. That's where many of the chemicals are hanging out. So this is why we have to have a strategy. How do we purge out these toxic metals? And that's where I find the coffee enemas are an indispensable tool in detoxification. And I've been doing them for over 20 years, almost one every day. And that's how I go through these massive copper dumps. And so right now my copper is actually normal, but that took me 7 years to get that copper into a normal range. Right now, I'm dumping nickel. Your body will dump metals as your adrenal reserves pick up, as the portals of elimination get more patent and open, and as the nervous system, because you have to be in that parasympathetic nervous system for detoxification. Most people are in sympathetic dominant. When you're in sympathetic dominant, you're not going to detox. You have to get that nervous system into that parasympathetic mode. You got to really work on getting patency in those organs of detoxification, and then you got to mineralize the body. So those are some of the strategies we use, but I feel that the coffee enema is absolutely an indispensable therapy if you want to remove that toxic copper hanging out in the liver. And I've seen it with my own eyes, my own body, going through massive copper dumps for 7 years. And when I was dumping copper, I had a few aggravations, but nothing crazy. I had a couple nights of insomnia. I had a couple joint flare-ups, but that was minimal because I knew how to use my homeopathic remedies to help deal with the aggravation. So your third kidney is your skin. So that's why we don't want toxic metals going through the kidneys. We want them coming out the largest organ, our skin. Hence the importance of sauna therapy. So when you incorporate sauna therapy and coffee enemas, that's a great 1-2 punch to help with detoxification of the body while you're doing mineral balancing, while you're getting yourself into that parasympathetic state. So there's many, many little tricks of the trade to help get people to start removing these heavy metals that will destroy us if we don't get them out.
And I know a lot of people aren't a fan of coffee, and I think in the HTMA community because of the caffeine and its effect on the adrenals, and you really have to buffer the effects quite a bit. But coffee will still reach the liver whether you're going orally or through the back end. It's kind of going to hit the liver anyway, right? Or what are your thoughts on that? Because that's a big emotional, it's almost like a religious debate in the health community around coffee. It's really interesting. I do well in it. I mean, I roast my own beans. I do just 2 shots of espresso a day, not coffee all day long. I do it after a meal. I don't do it when I'm tired. I'll actually take a day off if I'm underslept. But do you think you could get a lot of the same benefits or the same benefits potentially just by doing coffee orally?
No. When we do the coffee enema and we're able to hold it, because the blood filters through the liver every 3 minutes. So we want 5 liver cycles. That's a 15-minute hold of the coffee enema. So the coffee enema, the enzymes in the activity of the coffee enema is going to the biliary caniculi to help dilate them. That's really what it's doing. So these biliary caniculi, where all the stuff has to go through, they're usually starting to calcify and fibrose. And when the coffee enema is just dilating these vessels so it can start moving the bile. As the bile moves, the garbage comes out. And then when you're sitting on the toilet bowl, you're saying, oh my God, that came out of me. It's like the worst smell ever. It's something, I mean, you look in the toilet bowl and you say, oh God, look at this garbage coming out. And it's amazing because better out than in. So to me, the coffee enema is working mostly on those biliary caniculi to help move that stagnant bile. If you don't move bile, you don't get healthy.
Okay. Interesting. I had a question. Go ahead.
You know who Max Gerson is, right?
Yep.
So he was the famous cancer doctor. He was from Germany. He got kicked out of Germany. He had to practice his natural medicine in Mexico. And he was doing a lot of IV nutrients and whole foods and juicing and all that stuff. He noticed when he started to incorporate the coffee enema, that's when he had profound effects on his cancer patients. He was having them do 3, 4, 5 coffee enemas a day, which I think is a little too much. But nonetheless, If you're doing one coffee enema a day, I think that's perfect as long as you stay consistent. And every time someone's doing coffee enemas, I always hear this. After they've been on them for a couple of months, 3 months, 6 months, they'll come back to me and say, that therapy changed my life, because they physically feel the difference. So I love the coffee enemas. I think, everyone in the natural medicine community should at least look at it, study it, and then come to your own conclusion. But to me, I find them absolutely wonderful in my practice.
What would you say the minimum is? Like, would once a week for people potentially be beneficial?
Nope, every day. Yeah. If you got to move bile, you think that, if that mercury's been in these biliary caniculi for, if you're 30 years old, that mercury's probably been in you for 30 years. And that's what's causing a lot of scarring and fibrosing of those caniculi. And as a result, you're not moving bile. If you don't move bile, you don't move out the toxic load, whether it's the infectious organisms, whether it's the mold, whether it's the metals. You've got to move bile. So that's why on a nutritional level, that's why I put a lot of people on a lot of bile movers, bile makers, to make sure we're moving the bile. And the coffee enema is a direct link to dilate the biliary caniculi so that bile can flow.
Interesting. Wow. Yeah, I think a lot of people are just adverse to putting something out the exit, zone.
A lot of anal retentive people. So we got to overcome our fears of that. And with men, it's a harder sell because, they get homophobic and all this. And we have to be able to deal with everything with honesty. There's nothing wrong with doing an enema. Even if you started with the saltwater enema just to move the fecal material, and the next round you did a coffee enema. But as long as you're doing them almost every day, and if you tell me I can't do them every day, I don't have the time, do it every other day. Oh, that's still too much. Then you need to rearrange why you're not getting healthy, because you have to prioritize health as super important if you want to get healthy. So I always tell my patients, I want you to get healthier. You need to want to get healthier a little bit more than I want you to get healthier, because you've got to do the homework. You've got to work for the nutrient. It's not just about popping pills. That's one part of it. You have to work for the nutrients. Your mindset has to be correct. Your detox practices have to be correct. You have to get out of all the stresses of life that are causing you to go into that sympathetic mode. So there's many, many parts to this healing journey. But when we start to become regimented and we have routines and we have our daily practices, that's where the smart money is at. Just having daily practices, knowing, even if you rotated, like one day you did a coffee enema, one day a sauna, coffee enema, sauna, coffee enema, sauna. That I'd be at peace with that. But for most people that have the copper, I want them hitting those coffee enemas so we can start purging out that copper. So if you don't deal with that copper, like I said, its end game will be the cancers or the brain diseases.
And it won't come out with just raising zinc?
Nope.
You're saying?
You got to work for it, man. I wish it was that easy, and everything takes work. If you want to be a millionaire, it takes work. You could sit there and think all the millions you want, but at the end of the day, you got to work for it. You want to be healthy, it takes work. And when I started my health journey in my, kind of my mid 30s is when I really hit it hard. It was a process. And every decade, I'm getting a little bit healthier. Bones are getting a little bit stronger. Mind's getting a little bit clearer. And so, again, we should age gracefully without the horrific, god-awful stuff we see in this world. But it takes work is really the bottom line. And that work should be pleasurable. It shouldn't be like, this is a chore, that's a chore. I'm at the point where I love going into my sauna. I love doing my coffee enemas. I love popping my pills. I love my niacin flush. And so we have to be able to exalt our health practices to make it enjoyable, where it's not a job. It has to be fun. It has to be regimented. It has to be coordinated. So it fits our lifestyle. And that's where we have to change a few things, but it has to be a high priority. If healing isn't a top 1, 2, or 3 in your life, you won't heal. So that's where I'm at with that.
I love it. I love it. Boy, so you're against megadoses, but you do the niacin flush. I want to circle back on that because that is high dose B3. I am a huge fan of Abram Hoffer. There's some interesting, really old interviews of him still on YouTube. And recently I've been going back, listening to him, Carl Pfeiffer, Linus Pauling. And it's really interesting what these guys were talking about. I mean, it was like zinc, B3, and vitamin C, right? Were like the focus for a while.
Those are some of my favorites. And niacin is a redox molecule. So it's doing a lot of reduction, oxidation, which makes it so valuable in detoxification. It's also a vasodilator, and that's part of the flush that we feel. We know when you're taking heroic doses of niacin, that will reduce the cholesterol. Most of us are walking around with high cholesterol, and cholesterol is not the enemy. Cholesterol is reacting to the inflammation and all the reactive oxygen species. So it's putting out the fire, and we think that the cholesterol is the problem. But that niacin is amazing for lowering the cholesterol, detoxification, reduction, oxidation. So I love my niacin flush. And I dose the niacin. I try to tell people, start with, typically most people can start with 100 milligrams and they'll get massively flushed. If I don't warn them, they'll think they're dying. But I'm prepping them that you're going to get a flush, and I explain, you get itchy, your neck and all your head will get red. So I prep them emotionally for the flush. And then once the 100 milligrams stops working, go to 2. Then you'll be flushing for another couple of weeks. And then when that slows down, go to 3. So you incrementally build up. And then you really don't want to go above 1,000 milligrams. So you want to stay between that 500 and 1,000 milligrams, which I think is still a good heroic dose, but not an extreme heroic dose. So again, I have to treat every nutrient with respect and to not get overzealous, but I do love niacin because I love how it feels on me.
Do you combine it with rebounding on a trampoline or the sauna? Because I know there's that protocol, it's like the Scientology protocol, right?
Yeah, that Tom Cruise Scientology. But they actually had some interesting stuff because with the 9/11, the firemen, they were putting them on heroic doses of niacin with the sauna flush, clearing out all that garbage that got into their lungs and their bronchi. And they were able to have pretty good results with the niacin in the sauna of removing that toxic load that was, that had gotten to them from the 9/11 disaster. So that's a good thing. But again, you don't want to always be on 1,000 milligrams, but I do like using the niacin in the sauna. So if I know I'm going to do a sauna, 30 minutes before the sauna, I'm going to take anywhere, between 400 and 600 milligrams of niacin. Then when I get into the sauna, I'm sweating like a dog, and I love that.
And do you drink, are you a fan of these electrolyte mixes? Like, I'm not talking about like liquid IV from Costco, but a sodium, potassium, magnesium. There's a million companies now selling those little sachets, little mineral packets that you can mix with water. Are you a fan of drinking something like that in the sauna while you're sweating?
For convenience, not bad, but you don't have to buy these expensive things. So my wife is from Bulgaria. So she told me that whenever she's boiling potatoes, she drinks the potato water and gets all her electrolytes. So there's many ways to skin the cat. You could just take pickle juice and get your electrolytes. That's what they did, the old school. But whatever is more convenient for you. So when I'm doing saunas and I'm feeling depleted, yes, I'll take a little electrolyte support to kind of replenish, but do you want to spend a lot of money on these little things, or do you just want some pickle juice that will do the job? So it depends. Even just taking a pinch of salt, putting it in some water, that will work. But I would rather wet the salt, use a Soleil, Then you wet your salt, and you take a teaspoon out of your Soleil, put that into your drinking water. That will work just fine. So again, depending on your budget, depending on convenience, how you want to go about it. But when you're feeling that depletion after a sauna, yes, you do want to hit those electrolytes to kind of recharge the battery, so to speak.
Awesome. I had a question. Like, think of my last trip to visit my family. I was reading on the plane Zinc and Other Micronutrients by Carl Pfeiffer, and he had a whole chapter on manganese, which I thought was interesting. And I know when I was taking the HTMA, supplements, Limcomin and stuff, there was a good amount of manganese. I think it was up to like 30 milligrams a day. That and molybdenum, I think, are those nutrients that you use often with people? Like, do you find that there are common deficiencies in one or both of those? Or
yeah, I think on a hair analysis, molybdenum is probably the most deficient mineral in the mineral matrix. And so one of the main functions of molybdenum is to keep copper in check. So a lot of pharma drugs, they use molybdenum and Wilson's disease and things like that to help remove the copper. But again, with molybdenum, it's remember in World War II, those big Bertha tanks, when the Germans started, when they were using their tanks, the steel would start to melt. And so they added molybdenum into the steel tanks so it was able to handle the heat so they wouldn't, malfunction. And molybdenum has a lot to do with iron, so it helps the storage of iron. It helps to detox a lot of the excess coppers, and it's working a lot with the nitrosamines in the body. So when we're getting these nitrates, it helps to detox that. There's a few enzymes that I don't remember off the top of my head, but it's working a lot with the nitrosamines that cause a lot of the stomach cancer. So molybdenum is an important micronutrient, but I typically don't usually go higher than 100 mcgs of molybdenum. And with manganese, if I see that sodium-potassium inversion and I want to raise sodium, I will put people on manganese because manganese is known to help raise the sodium. And so usually I'll put them on anywhere from 10 milligrams to 30 milligrams of manganese to help raise the sodium. And then if I see some overt in-your-face manganese deficiencies, I may put them on anywhere from 10 to 30 milligrams of manganese. But it depends on the profile, the patient's sensitivity, and all that type of stuff. Did I answer that question?
That was great. So I need to do a new HTMA test. I think I have like 3 sitting around here, but my one from late last year, I had low sodium to potassium ratio, but my manganese was actually in the reference range, like approaching high. Is that still a sign that I would at least take 10 to 30 a day? Or
I would say on the safer side, 10 milligrams, not knowing you and how you respond, I would say 10 milligrams would be a pretty safe zone, knowing that you have a sodium-potassium inversion and knowing that you got a lot of probably toxic manganese in you that has to come out. Manganese can be in 3 different oxidation states. So it's in the other oxidation states, it's behaving like a toxic metal. And that will affect the brain. That will cause a lot of craziness in the brain, kind of like mercury. So with the manganese, I would really focus on detoxing that toxic manganese out. Where were you exposed to manganese, do you think? Were you a welder?
Maybe in another life, not in this one. Trying to think. I mean, I was thinking of the environment. Like, I was raised in Southern California, which just got, that's like a metropolis, just got so populated growing up there in the 90s and the early 2000s, where I just remember a lot of air pollution. I was driving almost every day for work and school for years, just breathing in car exhaust, window down. Actually, lately, the last week, I've been going down a rabbit hole of like articles, clinical studies on car exhaust and the damage that causes, the oxidative stress and and the lipid peroxidation increase. And I mean, there's so many metals that are just floating around from burning gas and diesel, right? I think that's something that people don't often think about. I mean, I used to just be huffing that daily for years in my car with windows fully down on like the freeway or something.
Yeah, I mean, we're all exposed to these toxic metals, and if we can't remove the toxic metals, then that's when they become a problem. So your blood is going to make sure that, that blood pH has to stay between that 7.35, 7.45, and it can't really waver at all. It has to keep that blood, pH, constant. And so if the metals get into the blood, it will immediately remove them into the organs, tissues, and glands. And then the body will sequester these toxic metals. And then these toxic metals become very disruptive to normal physiology. So we've all been exposed through the vaccines, through our in utero. Most of us are getting these toxic metals from our mothers in utero. And if our mothers, whatever they did in their lives, from the alcohol, the chemicals, whatever they were doing, we're getting all their garbage. And then each generation's getting a little weaker and weaker as the vaccines are getting more, powerful, as the toxic load in this world is getting more powerful. So the exposure to all these chemicals and metals, we've never seen the likes of it. This is why when Nixon waged a war on cancer in the 1970s, you would think cancer would have gone down, but it skyrocketed where, like I said, 1 out of 2 adults will get a cancer diagnosis in 2024. And it's because of this toxic load. That's why part of mineral balancing, part of getting healthy is putting the spotlight on how do we intelligently detox the body, because we got to get this toxic manganese out, toxic copper out, toxic iron out, plus the other toxic metals, the cadmium, the lead, the arsenic, the mercury, etc.
Do you think EMF sensitivity is just mineral imbalance in the body? When people say they're EMF sensitive, do you think they just have an excess of metals making them an antenna?
That's a good question. It's like, I've known that the healthier I've gotten, when I was in my 20s, if I walked into a department store and I started smelling Chanel No. 5, which was loaded with the aldehydes, those aldehydes have to be broken down. First, you need that zinc-dependent enzyme to break it down. Then that aldehyde dehydrogenase, the metal cofactor is molybdenum. And so, like I said, molybdenum is the most deficient mineral on hair analysis. And so with all these aldehydes and smells, we become so sensitive to everything. And so the more sensitive you are to EMFs or sense, like if I'm in an Uber car, that drives me crazy. I don't react like I once did, but I still hate that shit that I'm smelling in these Uber cars. So I'll just unplug it, But whenever we see people that are very sensitive, it is telling me that they're probably a little bit too toxic, because these EMFs are really affecting the calcium-gated channels. And then when calcium is flooding in, that's another cell signaling molecule, and that's regulating so many functions in the body, to release dopamine and serotonin. And, when you have in the terminal end of a neuron in these vesicles where the dopamine or serotonin or acetylcholine, when calcium hits that threshold, it's released, and calcium untethers the vesicle to release that neurotransmitter, whether it's dopamine or serotonin or whatever. So when we're exposed to these EMFs, we can be exciting the calcium, releasing the neurotransmitters, causing us to have a wave of this symptom or that symptom. Did that make sense?
Anxiety, depression. I was just watching. I was watching the interview the other day on, Neuralink, the blank brain implant they're working on, and he was saying it's going to be a game changer for like major depressive disorder, because depression's ruining lives. And he acknowledged there's many factors to depression, and I'm like, well, yeah, let's try doing those before we put a chip in.
Yeah. You see, I'm wearing this hat to protect my brain from the EMFs. So this is like my strategy because I'm on the computer all day long, and what we're exposed to, and I have zero hair on my head, so I'm going to be more exposed to these EMFs penetrating my brain neurochemistry. So I like to wear this as a little protective coat, and it just feels good on my head, or I'm just used to it. Either or.
That's awesome. Yeah, I went down that rabbit hole for a while. It's such a deep. I mean, talk about nuance. That the whole EMF thing is just crazy. You could spend your whole life just on that.
Right. Like they said, there's so much, minutia of everything. So I said, let's stick to the basics. The basics are mineralize the body, detoxify the body, get yourself more in that parasympathetic mode, and then the healing journey will be pretty easy if you stay consistent. When I say easy, you will hit a roadblock every now and then, but our goal when we hit that roadblock or that speed bump, we'll get through it. And we'll get through it. And each time we get through it, we get a little bit healthier, a little bit stronger. So it's having the courage, the resiliency, and the intelligence to navigate through an aggravation. And that's where most people should get some kind of coaching on their side, some assistance, to have some trained eyes in your corner to help people navigate through an aggravation when they're embarking on a detoxification mineral balancing program. Now, there's some that can do it on their own, but most people don't have time to study every little nuance and detail about everything in natural medicine. That's why it's good for some people to get some trained eyes in their corner to help navigate them through this crazy ride of detoxification and mineralization.
That's great. Do you want to jump into some questions? Because we have quite a few.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thoughts on vitamin C dosages and functions related to iron and copper. I know in a lot of the old school books I've read, like the orthomolecular medicine books, they often talk about how vitamin C can help detox excess copper.
Yeah, that was like orthomolecular. That's what Linus Pauling, two-time Nobel laureate, champion for the people. He's the reason why we're not detonating nuclear bombs in the desert anymore, because he gathered 100 of the top scientists, petitioning Congress to say, stop this nuclear nonsense. And, and we're still paying the price for all of that. But Linus Pauling was big into vitamin C. He really, to me, is the grandfather of nutritional medicine, and he doesn't get the due respect that he deserves. And this man was a genius. So I'm a big fan of vitamin C. Love my vitamin C. But again, I don't go crazy with any one nutrient. I personally am around 1,000 milligrams a day. Every now and then when I'm under stress and I feel like my body's breaking down, I may for a couple days take 2,000, 3,000 milligrams. But again, it will be short term. When I feel like I'm getting a little sickly with a cold flu, I'll up my zinc a little bit. And for maybe 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, I may double the dose of my zinc, but then I'll come right back down to normal dose. But I love my vitamin C. I love Linus Pauling. And I think that in the vitamin C world, we're wasting too many moments and time on all the minutia with vitamin C. I just said, get a good quality vitamin C and get it into you, because it is important. So that dopamine beta hydroxylase enzyme, where we take dopamine, that dopamine has to be converted to adrenaline. And so that enzyme, that dopamine beta hydroxylase enzyme, is vitamin C and copper dependent. So vitamin C is ping-ponging the electrons to copper, and copper is ping-ponging the electrons to oxygen to make that enzyme work. So there is an interrelation with copper and vitamin C. What was the iron part of that question?
Well, I know I've heard varying things. Like you'll hear vitamin C increases iron absorption, but then I've also read when you take ascorbic acid with, say, a steak, you can actually cause, or with an iron supplement to be, more direct, you can cause increased oxidative stress in the intestinal tract. with that reaction. So I don't know. I guess that's kind of the question, because it does increase iron absorption, but it could potentially increase oxidative stress. I don't know. Maybe that's just minutia stuff.
Yeah, because vitamin C can be both a pro-oxidant and an antioxidant, depending on where it's being utilized in the body. And so I don't do any real iron supplementation per se. I don't put any patients on iron supplementation, but I do use the tissue salt iron phosphate. And I find that the tissue salt iron phosphate is probably the gentlest, easiest way to influence iron metabolism in the body. So that's why I love my tissue salts.
And those are more homeopathic, right?
It's a weird thing. So they're a mix between a homeopathic remedy. So they're not quite a homeopathic remedy, but they are. They're not quite a mineral, but they are. They're in that gray area because they're giving you 1 part per million of the actual mineral. That 1 part per million, when we take a tissue salt, it's being absorbed through the mucosal layer and it gets immediately absorbed into the blood. The tissue salts are influencing, if you're taking iron, it's influencing the iron pull in the body. If you're taking magnesium, it's influencing the magnesium pull in the body. So I find these tissue salts are wonderful for helping with mineral rebalancing when we have an excess or a deficiency. So it's working kind of like an adaptogen, like an herbal adaptogen. If something's too high, it brings it down. If something's low, it's bringing it up, because it's working on the energetic field of the mineral matrix to add intelligence to the mineral grid. That's how I look at how these tissue salts are working. So it's in that gray area. It's kind of a homeopathic, it's kind of a mineral, but it works completely on a whole other level.
That's awesome. I want to try them out. I've never taken them.
Yeah. With a lot of my zinc sensitive patients, and when people take zinc, they feel horrible, because it does tear up your stomach a little bit. You feel crampy, you feel nauseous. So my zinc sensitive patients, start them on the zinc tissue salt, 3x zinc chloride or 6x zinc chloride. And that's the way to build up that zinc pool, to sensitize them to zinc. Then you can start building up the zinc grid with 5 milligrams, 10 milligrams, 15, 20, 30 milligrams. You can build them up slowly to the ones that are very sensitive. When they take zinc, I can't take zinc, I want to puke. So I start them on the homeopathic tissue salt, zinc chloride, and that will add intelligence to zinc metabolism. So then I can give them the crude dose of zinc in, mineral form. And then they don't react as violently to that. And then we build up that zinc pool over time.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I can take like zinc carnosine form on an empty stomach, and I've never felt nausea, even taking 30 milligrams at a time or whatever. So my intestinal tract must be decent. Hopefully.
Yeah. And what do you need to make stomach acid? What's the all-star in making stomach acid?
Zinc.
What's the all-star in making your pancreatic juices?
Zinc.
So that's why zinc should be in every, digestive type of formula to help repair the gut, to get the stomach acid on board, to get the pancreatic juices on board. You got to have zinc. So that's the zinc conundrum, because most of us are walking around with marginal zinc deficiencies. We're sensitive to taking zinc. Most of us, when they do take zinc, they just react a little negatively. So I said, for every problem, there's always a solution. So we focus on, what's the solution? And that's where I find those little tissue salts really help me in my practice when I have a sensitive person to whatever mineral or vitamin they're taking.
Yeah, it's really interesting. On the same kind of wave here, I know you mentioned it before, but the ideal zinc to copper ratio, and it's really interesting. I think you actually commented on one of my posts, because almost every PubMed article I'll find will be different. Like I think some people make it out to be like it's always the same ratio in every study. I saw 1-to-1 in a study that I posted. I mean, it's, I'm going to say 16-to-1, but specifically on this topic, blood versus food versus supplements, because the ratio of each is going to be different, right? So what are your thoughts on that whole thing, kind of delving deeper into the ratio?
Like I said, if you have 2,000 milligrams of total zinc and you have 100 milligrams of total copper, that to me is a 21 to ratio. That's how I look at the math. And hair analysis, it's 8-to-1, 10-to-1. I think it should be a 20-to-1 ratio of zinc to copper. Just from the basic math, we have about 2,000 milligrams of zinc in all of the body. We have about 100 milligrams of copper in the total body. So that's a 20-to-1 ratio. So that's where I'm at with that.
Mm-hmm. And with food,
what's that?
And with food, like we're a big fan of oysters. Being in the Pacific Northwest, we have awesome fresh raw oysters right now, and we eat them generally about once a week. I'll do like a dozen. Are you? I know they have both zinc and copper, right? But the amount of zinc is way more than the amount of copper in oyster.
Yeah,
right?
I think I don't know what the ratio. I know it's got the highest zinc of all the foods on planet Earth. Oysters have the highest zinc. So that's why, remember in folklore, they said aphrodisiacs eat your oysters, because the oyster is giving you the zinc to affect the sperm. The oyster is giving you the copper to influence the estrogen. That's why the oyster was considered the great aphrodisiac, because it affected zinc and copper, because it had the perfect content of zinc and copper in that food. So that was some of the folklore in that. But with the world being so toxic copper, because of all of the fake estrogens causing copper retention, I would say you got to be careful with the oysters, and how clean is the water with all the all the microbes in the water. So you got to be careful with that. But even in when we look at copper, which is fascinating, are you familiar with the iconic masterpiece by Botticelli called The Birth of Venus?
I don't believe so.
So it's a masterpiece painting of the goddess Venus, Aphrodite, and she's sitting on the oyster or calcium shell.
Okay. Yeah.
That painting was painted in Cyprus. Cyprus in Latin means cuprum. Cuprum is copper. So the birth of the feminine is copper. So the metal of antiquity of Venus. Venus is the most feminine planet in the solar system. Since the beginning of time, the metal of Venus has always been copper. So that's energetically from day one, they always told us that copper and estrogen and zinc in the male and the sperm production. So that's some of the energy of that zinc and copper that I find fascinating on an energetic level. There it is.
I've seen that before. Yep.
Yeah. So that was painted on the island of Cyprus. And look at her hair. She's got the copper hair, right?
Right.
And
wow.
And then she's standing on that oyster shell or some calcium shell. And that's showing kind of symbolically copper's relationship with calcium, because excess copper will cause calcium to go rogue. When calcium goes rogue, our whole goal in mineral balancing is to slow down premature aging by regulating calcium. Because when calcium precipitates out of solution, that becomes all your deposition diseases. That will be the cataracts, the gallstones, the kidney stones, the joint rot, calcium plaquing in the brain, calcium gooking up every artery, vein in the body. So our whole goal in mineral balancing is to regulate and modulate calcium metabolism. And that's why sodium and potassium keep calcium in solution, and magnesium is the great antagonizer to calcium. Calcium contracts, magnesium relaxes. So when they give you when you have hypertension, they give you a calcium channel blocker because they don't want the heart to contract. So the natural calcium channel blocker, of course, is magnesium. So when we die, we go into rigor mortis. Rigor mortis is because all the calcium channels in the body are open and flood, and that causes a full-blown contracture that we call rigor mortis. That is death, because magnesium, the spark of life, is no longer there to oppose calcium, so calcium is released. But the whole goal in mineral balancing is to slow down premature aging by modulating and regulating calcium metabolism. And that's why we always look at sodium, potassium, magnesium that keep calcium in check.
Wow.
That was a different sidebar.
Well, that was great. And also vitamin D, right? Because having it too low or too high, both of those can cause calcification, right? From my research, by its influence on parathyroid hormone. And
yeah, because the main function, vitamin D and VDR receptors have 1,000 jobs in the body, and many, many genes have VDR receptors. So that vitamin D, when you have that zinc finger, so when you activate the vitamin D and its target organ is the stomach, then it will modulate gene expression to absorb calcium, to absorb phosphorus in the stomach. If the target organ is in the kidneys, it will reabsorb calcium and phosphorus in the kidneys. If that target organ happens to be the bones, it will modulate calcium and phosphorus in the bones. So vitamin D is another co-player of calcium metabolism. So if you have a calcium shell, or you have just high calcium, or you're in a sympathetic dominant pattern, taking vitamin D would be the absolute worst thing you could do, because that's going to increase soft tissue calcification. And that calcification isn't going into the bones, it's going to everywhere where you don't want those calcium deposits. And that's what we call deposition diseases. The dentists were the first ones to discover it. The plaque on our teeth is calcium deposits. So that's where we have to understand, how do we regulate and modulate calcium? Who are the players of calcium? And vitamin D is absolutely one of the players.
With your clients, do you ever have them get like a 25D vitamin D test? See
when a patient comes to me, I'm going to use hair, blood, saliva, stool, urine. So I'm going to do pretty much all of those tests. So I'm going to be able to profile you. So my goal when I profile you, I want to know, where is that homocysteine? Where is that C-reactive protein? Where is that cholesterol? Where is calcium? Where is zinc? Where are those toxic metals? Are you a pore eliminator? Are you in a 4-low? Are you in a calcium shell? Are you in a sympathetic dominant pattern? So when I profile someone, I'm using everything. I want to know about your gut function. I want to know if you have, H. pylori, or if you have low stomach acid, or if you have low pancreatic output, or you got blood in your stool. So I want to be able to profile someone from all angles. And most importantly, I want to be able to profile your medical history, all the suppressive medicines you've taken through the years, all the hits you've taken through the years. So that's how I know, how to work with the patient and how to guide them through their healing journey, by using the labs, by using their medical history, by using their personal history to paint the picture, so I know who's in front of me as I work with them. So that's in a simple nutshell of how I'm working with my patients.
That's great. Someone asked thoughts on lithium, which we touched on a little bit. Is there ever a bad time to supplement with it?
It's a good question. As long as it's nutritional lithium, so it's not pharma grade lithium, which
Carbonate.
Is horrible, but nutritional lithium has a place. I use a little nutritional lithium myself. I don't take it every day. I probably take a dose once a week, approximately. So I don't have a strong, concrete answer for that, but I do pay attention to lithium. It is an important ion for the brain, and we know how pharma drugs understand that people that have, the severe depressions, they're putting them on lithium. So building someone's lithium up if they are prone to seasonal depression or they have mania and depression, maybe some nutritional lithium could be absolutely wonderful for them. So I would answer, yes, I like lithium, but with that caveat, not to go crazy with lithium.
That's great. Yeah, I interviewed a PhD on my show that's into like genetic health optimization. He looked at my gene mutations regarding B12, and lithium's intimately attached to B12 metabolism. So he was like, here's 5, 6, 7 mutations or something where lithium would support and help you absorb and utilize B12. It's like, that's cool.
Yeah. So. Do you take lithium?
Yeah, you're talking to Mr. Megadose, and I do usually short bouts, so I don't go for years megadosing, which I think would really cause the issues. But just to, I would just want to see if something I could feel it, and so I'll take large amounts to experiment. And in the winter, I love cod liver oil here. I take larger doses of cod liver oil as it gets down to 0 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's like my antifreeze. But really, I mean, polyunsaturated fats and the vitamin A in there, it's definitely increases my cold resilience. But yeah, lithium, I'd say 10 to 20 a day, somewhere in there, 10 to 20.
Oh, wow. You're doing kind of mega dosing.
I mean, I was taking more before. When I showed you my HTMA, that's when I was, 80 for 2-3 weeks, something like that.
How did it affect you? Did you notice your brain firing better on all cylinders?
It was. Absolutely. Yeah, I don't know if it was sustainable long term, but I definitely had enhanced mental function. And I find that 10 to 20 a day is my sweet spot as far as mood improvement and memory enhancement and all of that. I love it. I think it's a lithium orotate.
Yeah. See, I love the fact that you experiment on yourself. So if you're going to peddle A, B, and C, you need to take it. And you're taking more of the heroic doses so its effect on you before you're selling it to the masses. So I think that's wonderful. Great job with that.
I appreciate it. This is a big picture question, which is good. Is mineral balancing a lifelong commitment? Won't your environment, water, food always be pushing you out of balance?
Great question. And yes, it's a lifelong journey. Now, we could take time off from our health regimens. We could take a few months off and just, if we're traveling or we got other events going on. But it is a lifelong journey because, man, health is the greatest wealth. And we want to be able to, we don't want to end up in a nursing home and having people, clean our privates because we don't have that function. We can't eat for ourselves. We can't walk. So health practices are absolutely a lifelong journey. And because the soils are so minerally bankrupt, we do absolutely have to supplement. Even if your diet is organic and pristine and you're choosing the perfect foods, the soils are so depleted because of the gazillion reasons of modern farming practices have destroyed the living soils. The living soils the dead soils are becoming minerally deficient, resulting in us becoming minerally bankrupt. So yes, long term, I think we're always on this healing journey. And that's why I said, make it fun, make it doable, but you got to be consistent. And if we're consistent in our health practices, then we will be fine. We will age gracefully, and our brains, the senility diseases, watching my mother go through her senility disease was the most god-awful thing I've ever witnessed. But I knew that was going to be the end result because my mom was copper toxic to the max, and that's where I got all my toxic copper from. And so just studying her case history, I knew that I was going to be copper toxic. Then when I did my first hair test, copper was at a 20. So I knew how toxic of a load of copper I had. And over time, Right now, it's in normal ranges, but like I said, I'm dumping nickel right now. So I've had the most nickel come out of me that I've ever seen on any hair test. And that is, it's amazing watching these metal dumps. And as these metal dumps come out, celebrate, because that means you're dumping your cancer, your arthritis, your brain diseases. And that's why healing is a lifelong journey, to answer his question in a simple nutshell.
I love it. Yeah, we're building a greenhouse here, and it's like the amount of time and money. I mean, especially living somewhere where it snows, it's no small feat. And so, that's really kind of opened my perspective up on all of this, because it's hard to, if you're going to do it right and build the soil up and, really grow food correctly, it's a lot of time and money. I mean, yeah, maybe certain parts of the world, you could just throw seeds in the ground, like you're in Hawaii, and you don't have to think about much. But we're in North Idaho. It's like we got to insulate the ground and take the Earth's heat up and do all this complicated stuff. It's like tens of thousands of dollars just to have real food. It's just the state of the world right now. We got to think about water filters and a lot of things we didn't have to before.
Yeah, it's a sad state of affairs where we're at. And that's why I said, if we're living in a toxic world, we got to have detox strategies. And every problem creates a solution. So now we think solution thing. All right, there's a problem. What are we going to do about it? You're being proactive and working your land, growing your food, filtering your water, taking your supplements, hitting the detox. This is the energy we got to put into our healing, because healing is the greatest journey we'll ever go on. And most people don't want to do the work. And then they end up with the cancers and the brain diseases. And, later in life, they wish maybe I should have been doing that 20 years ago before I got the cancer, before, the senility stuff started kicking in. So I commend you on all the work that you're doing. You really are epitomizing what you're talking about on your health program, because you're doing it. That's what I love, being proactive. So you see a lot of fat doctors, sick doctors, selling this, selling that, but yet they're not healthy. You look pretty healthy. Maybe you're not perfect, but you're a work in progress, as we're all a work in progress. And our goal is to get a little bit healthier every year.
Well, I appreciate that, Robert, and back at you. So thanks for that. This is a good question. And one, I'm curious, your thoughts, inorganic versus organic minerals. I think you might have had a post on inorganic referencing, can't remember his name. Some say to never supplement inorganic minerals. So it was my understanding, like an organic mineral has a carbon attached to it, right?
See, all minerals to me are inorganic. So all minerals in supplemental form will have some amino acid or carbon or something attached to it. But all minerals are inorganic.
Right.
Carbon chemistry is organic chemistry. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. That's your organic chemistry. That, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen makes up 97, 98% of who you are. But it needs that 2% of the inorganic metals to bring life to carbon chemistry. So to me, all the minerals are inorganic.
Perfect. Okay. That clears it up. Yeah, it makes sense. Can you reverse gray hair? Is that a copper to zinc imbalance?
That's a good question. To some degree, yes. If it's coming on earlier in life, you catch it earlier in life, absolutely. If you're in your 50s and 60s and you're showing signs of gray, it's going to be a little bit more challenging. But if you're seeing it early in life, absolutely, you can start, getting it early on. So that's a good question. I mean, I wish I knew the knowledge I had today when I was in my 20s. I wouldn't be bald today.
We have a lot of interesting stuff now. We got red light helmets and different things. I know it's oxidative stress related, right? So,
yeah. At the end of the day, that oxidative stress, because oxygen is the gift and the curse. We absolutely need the oxygen, But in excess, those oxygen species, those superoxide anions become the curse. And that's why copper and iron have to be understood, and understanding copper and iron's love affair with oxygen. Because some creatures breathe using copper, land creatures such as us breathe using iron. But iron and copper have a love affair with oxygen. And again, that's their gift and that's their curse. That's why we need to understand that copper and iron.
How to know one's iodine levels?
Ain't that a great question? So iodine is the heaviest metal that we consume. On the periodic table of elements, it is the heaviest. It's in the halogens. So whenever we start with iodine, go easy at first, because the halogens, the fluorine, the chlorine, the bromide, we've been inundated with all those toxic halogens. And when we come in with the iodine, that will start to displace the bromide, the fluorine, the chlorine, and you'll get some horrible symptoms as a result. So I like to start with simple doses of iodine, building up, and I tend to follow the dose of what the Japanese are taking, and I like a lot of the seaweeds, but I also like just taking iodine. If someone's sensitive to just taking an iodine pill, start them on the seaweed, start them easy, build them up, because that bromide is in everything. So they took out the iodine in the flour. I think that was in the 60s. They took out the iodine in the flour, and then they brominated the flour. So we've been brominated with this toxic bromide that's destroying our iodine. So iodine's a big deal, but go easy, because it is the heaviest metal nutrient you will consume.
Wow. Yeah, I remember I used to paint myself back in my truly wild days with the Lugol's, just rub that over the skin. Is it possible to reverse a calcium shell, and can you still consume dairy while you're working on that?
Absolutely. I've seen calcium shells come down all the time. You got to give yourself anywhere between 1 to 2 years before that shell starts to break. And as that shell breaks, you still need good calcium, so you always need calcium. If you're eating a good, clean, organic diet and you're sourcing your calcium intelligently, there'll be no issue with taking calcium while you're trying to break that shell down. So I think that's a great question. And people say, my calcium is high, avoid calcium. That will be a mistake. That calcium is high, that's the oxidized, unavailable, metastatic calcium that's coming out. So you still need that good calcium coming in. So as you're breaking the shell down, absolutely eat that good calcium in that diet. Just source it intelligently is the short answer to that good question.
Great. This is a really interesting one and a fun, controversial one. Why are so many people allegedly seeing results on dosing on the high dose copper protocol? So like megadosing, whatever, copper sulfate or bisglycinate or whatever they're choosing. Is it any reason you could see why people would feel a short-term benefit from that?
That's another interesting question. And then what's our population sample that we're talking about? How long have they been on copper? How long have they been feeling good? And have they been doing that 1 year, 2 years? I need to know a little bit more information on how long they've been taking 10 milligrams, 20, whatever dose they're taking of copper. They're probably taking more heroic doses of copper, and they're doing it over time. And right now they're feeling good. Eventually you're going to hit that speed bump, because that copper is so reactive. Like I previously said, it moves electrons better than anything. The chemical secret to life is the movement of electrons. How these electrons move, we got to take that quantum leap. So in physics, we're going to have to get into that quantum physics to understand how an electron works in the body. And knowing that copper is moving the electrons, moving the electricity, So maybe it is lighting up your brain. Maybe it is giving you more energy. But the long-term results of that may be detrimental down the road. So that's where I'd be a little bit cautious, because we don't want to be a penny wise, pound foolish. So we got to be careful and respect copper.
And kind of on the same vein, with supplementing, is there a difference with men versus women? Like I know you mentioned, zinc's concentrated in the muscle, and we know men generally have more muscle mass than women. So would women, if they're supplementing zinc, would they need slightly more copper to balance it out? Or is there a difference based on gender of supplementing zinc?
Yeah, that's another great question, because the prostate and sperm heavily zinc dependent. So, ask yourself a question. Why has the sperm count decreased 50% in the last 50 years where men are shooting blanks? And then across the board, we see that low zinc everywhere. So we have to make these connections. So zinc is absolutely going to be more of a masculine mineral, and copper is going to be more of a feminine mineral. So women may do a little bit better with the copper, provided that they're not estrogen dominant. Most women today are estrogen dominant. So we got to be careful with that. And so it's an interesting question. I don't know if I directly answered that or not,
great.
But it is fascinating. So I do believe that men absolutely need that zinc. I believe women need almost as much zinc as men, but maybe a little bit less. But because everyone is so copper or so estrogen dominant, I would be careful with the copper and that type of protocol, because that could make a woman more estrogen dominant. What does estrogen do? Estrogen is going to promote growth, fibroid growth, cyst growth, acne growth, weight growth, cancer growth.
That's great. Kind of a curveball, methylene blue. Have you looked into that? Any thoughts on
methylene blue? So that was one of the first drugs ever prescribed, and it's under the medical radar because the FDA, they don't have a monopoly on it, because it got grandfathered in before the FDA got really powerful. So that methylene blue is a powerful redox recycler. So it absolutely is working some magic. And it's an antifungal, antibacterial, antiparasitic, antiviral. So methylene blue does have a place. So I love methylene blue, and I think it's an important part. When I see people loaded with mold infections and candidas, I'll put them on methylene blue instead of any other pharmaceutical drug. I'd rather put them on methylene blue, knowing it's a redox recycler, knowing that it's antifungal. So yes, I love methylene blue.
That's great. And yeah, don't take it with vitamin C. I learned that with Doris Lowe, because it'll reduce vitamin C and kind of make it's a wash. You won't get the effects. So take it separately from your ascorbic acid.
Yeah, probably with niacin too, I would guess too.
Right. That's a really good point. Let's see, maybe just a couple more. Kind of a loaded question, but best way to detox a child of high arsenic and aluminum? Because you would say mineral balancing, right?
See, that with children, you're not going to be able to do coffee enemas with children. You're not going to be able to throw them into the saunas. So I do like this advanced TRS, which is a zeolite made in a laboratory. So it's like the cleanest zeolite, because most zeolite we buy already contains the heavy metals because it's doing its job. It's pulling out the metals. So I like with children, getting them on a little bit of zinc, getting them on a little bit of calcium, getting them on a little bit of magnesium, and even a little bit of selenium, and then using the binder. That advanced TRS is a simple product because children aren't going to swallow a lot of pills. So this is a spray. It's so child friendly. And then I would come in with a lot of the tissue salts to help organ support. You can give some organ support, liver remedies, organ support, kidney remedies, using the tissue salts and homeopathic remedies that are the safest for children. So the other thing I would do is foot soak. So I would get them on these ionic foot soaks, and I like the Rife foot soak, getting their feet in there, setting the Rife program to whatever you need to set that program for, doing that, because kids don't mind doing foot soaks. It's hard to get them in a sauna. It's hard to get them to do a coffee enema. Although I have a few parents having their kids doing coffee enemas and sauna therapies, so it's not impossible, but we have to be able to work with these children because they are loaded with toxic metals. So when I say most adults are poor eliminators, with children, you're going to see those metals coming out, and you're always going to see that zinc deficiency on a hair analysis pretty quickly. With an adult, it may take a year, 2 years, 7 years before that zinc deficiency is revealed. So go easy with the kids. Think tissue salts, think some homeopathic remedies, think some organ support remedies using homeopathics, a little bit of zinc, a little bit of calcium, a little bit of magnesium, a little bit of selenium, and a little bit of silica. I like silica for children because it doesn't taste bad at all. And you could put a couple drops of that silica in their water, and that will grab a lot of the garbage in the intestinal tract, and then cleaning up their diet. So there's a lot we can do with these children, and we have to fight for these kids because they are our future, and they're as toxic as they're worse than what we are. Each generation is getting worse and worse, and I feel bad for these children. So we got to keep fighting for these kids. So there's always a solution to everyone. And with the kids, keep it simple, but don't be afraid to give them things. See where they're at, how many pills they can swallow. Maybe you have to, instead of getting pill form, maybe you got to crush them up, get them into their foods. Maybe you got to use some more liquid mineral vitamin stuff. So stay flexible, but stay aggressive with those kids. Don't quit on them.
I love it. Robert, this was great. Appreciate you coming on and sharing your wisdom and experience with all of this. It was really fun to finally do it. I've been following your work for years, and I think the first video I saw from you was you were talking about zinc and copper, but getting really esoteric with it, bringing the astrology into it and planets into it.
Yeah, that's why I throw a lot of people a curveball when I bring in the esoteric stuff, because to me, that's alchemy. Alchemy is the oldest science known to mankind. Before science, there was alchemy. So I want to be true to alchemy and understand it. And that's working on the energetic field. But I also want to be true to just basic biochemistry. So between the science and the alchemy, I want to find the art in the art and science of healing. And that's why I love using both. That's why I love using homeopathy. That's why I love mineral balancing, because we want to incorporate everything that will help raise the bar on our healing journey.
Awesome. All right. Back to naturalhealth.com. If you guys want to work with Dr. Robert, you can go on there, and you have blogs, and videos, and you're working one-on-one with people, or?
Yeah. You have to go, my wife screens everyone, and she's tough because we only work with who we can really work with. So she screens a lot of people, and she's tough. And so she's selective on who we take, because like I said, you got to want to get better more than I want you to get better. So we're very selective on who we take.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Robert. This was a blast. Stick around as we close out the show.
Excellent. Thank you.
I don't know about you guys, but I took a whole bunch of notes during that episode. Highly recommend checking out Robert's YouTube channel. It's just at Robert Selig on YouTube. He has a great video on that zinc-dependent metalloenzyme called carbonic anhydrase. It seems like copper is getting more and more of the spotlight in the natural health community, and we're forgetting about zinc, and a lot of practitioners are actually demonizing zinc, saying we should never ever supplement it, when you consider all of the different roles that zinc has in the body, and according to Robert, 98% of people on the planet have a subtle zinc deficiency, that's pretty scary. And it starts to explain the endless myriad of symptoms that people experience. I was not aware that the vitamin D receptor requires zinc. I knew that it required vitamin A or retinol, but I was unaware of zinc. So it's really interesting, the interrelationship of all of these different vitamins and minerals. I found the coffee enema discussion interesting. I've done countless of those in the past, but I haven't recently. And I would just hope that there's another way. I know I've had Adam Bergstrom on the show several times and asked him about him. He used to be a colon hydrotherapist, and he thinks that you get the exact same effect consuming coffee orally for the liver. So that's an area that I'd like to research more. I like to always think that there's more than one road that leads to the top of the mountain. I also want to look more into tissue salts. I might have taken them years ago, but my interest has definitely peaked after speaking with Robert, especially with the iron phosphate one, because I know iron supplements tend to cause some turbulence in the intestinal tract. So I think Robert's doing incredible work and sharing life-changing information. As I said before, definitely check out his YouTube channel. You just search Robert Selig on YouTube. His website is backtonaturalhealth.com. And he has a really interesting quote up there that says, "From one strand of hair, I can tell if you are pre-diabetic, depressed, if your immune system is compromised, or if you have too much aluminum in your system that is impacting your brain health." That's a pretty bold claim, but the proof is in the pudding. And Robert has a lot of successful client stories. You can read about those under the testimonials tab on his website. My website is matt-blackburn.com. You could read about my CLF protocol, see all of my recommended products. I recently learned that the hypoallergenic air filters that HypoAir makes are actually off-grid friendly. So I stopped using them for a while because I thought they used a ton of electricity, these really advanced air filters with UV light and bipolar ionization technology. As it turns out, they're very off-grid friendly. So recently I put the HypoAir large iAdapt unit in the living room, and then I like using the small filter in the bedroom. And what's really nice about them is you could keep the UV lights on and turn off the lights on the top, which tend to be really bright in a really dark room. But what I do with the small one in the bedroom, because I like very minimal light, I turn off the UV bulb and I turn off the bipolar ionization. So all that's running is the fan. So it's just sucking in particulates and dust. And I press a button on top that dims all of the lights where you can almost barely see them. And then on the brightest one, I just put a little electrical tape or a sticker over to cover it. And there's pretty much no light emitting from the device. Even though we live in a cabin in the woods, we still get wildfires out here. And you can still have poor air quality, even if you live in a rural area, even in the forest. So air filtration to me is super important, even if you just have a bare bones HEPA filter in your house. And if you want to check out Mitolife, that's my supplement company, you can go to mitolife.co. We just released a really powerful, I think the best on the market, under-counter 7-stage drinking water filter. Very effective, very affordable, and very easy to maintain with its twist-off filters. Then because we talked quite a bit about zinc in the show, we sell a zinc carnosine complex, which is zinc bound to the amino acid L-carnosine. One of the reviews reads, I'm autoimmune and have ulcerative colitis, skin sensitivity, dermatitis, occasional candida problems, dry eye, and issues with catching colds, etc. So far, the zinc has greatly improved my skin and candida issues and hasn't aggravated my ulcerative colitis. In fact, I think it is lessening the GI bleeding, but I'm still waiting for a complete recovery on that front. Just so glad this formula doesn't bother my stomach. I take it with food. As I told Robert, I can take zinc carnosine on an empty stomach, even significant amounts of it, and I don't experience any nausea or upset stomach. I think it is one of the most gentle forms of zinc that you could supplement. I actually forgot to ask Robert in the show about zinc and dream recall because I've been doing sleep experiments for a long time, actually, since I was about 12 years old, practicing lucid dreaming. But on the nutrition front, for about 14 years now, doing different experiments to see how I can improve my sleep. And of all of the things I've tried, zinc is truly the only one that I've noticed increased dream recall. So in the past, when I wasn't supplementing zinc, I would remember on average one dream a year. And lately, I've been remembering at least 2, sometimes 3 dreams every night. And really, the biggest change I've made is supplementing more zinc, not just taking 16 milligrams or 30 milligrams, like I was dabbling with my own supplement for a while. But I did this experiment of taking 4 capsules 3 or 4 times a day and getting up between that 100 to 200 milligram mark. And forgot to ask him about absorption as well, because we're not absorbing everything that's in the supplement, even though on the Mitolife supplement, you'll see 16 milligrams under the supplement facts. You only absorb a fraction of that. So to me, that takes away a lot of the fear factor. We don't absorb 100% of the supplements that we take. I think that dream recall is one of those free metrics that you can look at to assess your health. And if you never remember your dreams, I think that's an issue. So I would recommend experimenting with zinc and see if you start remembering your dreams again. And then if you're a part of the Mitolife Academy on YouTube, just posted a treat for members. It was a 2-part tour of the outside of my cabin and what goes into the off-grid property, the solar panels, the propane, the generator, stuff that I wish people told me about as I was getting into off-grid living about 3 years ago. So check that out on YouTube, Mitolife Academy. If you're not a member, it's $15 a month, and you gain access to private videos and my latest research and things that I'm experimenting with. I always forget to mention 1% of sales at Mitolife is donated to Deliver Fund, a nonprofit organization that fights human trafficking using really advanced AI techniques. So the link is at the bottom of the Mitolife site if you want to delve into that and read about it. So that's all for today. I'll see you guys next Friday. Stay supercharged.